So in this chapter, I'm going to be walking you through the steps that you need to take in order to sign, build, and publish your application to the Android market. Now, the project I'm going to be using is just a very simple application I created called bPhoto. And this is the simplest possible application. It's just a photo of B, and that's essentially the entire application. And we're going to walk through the various steps that it needs to take to publish this so that people can download it. So in this first movie, we're going to look at what you need to do to prepare your project so that it's fit for actually exporting to the market. So one of the things that we want to do is, let me go into my source code here, into my main activity. Now you want to go in and remove any calls to logcat. So here you can see I have a simple debug log call that basically tells me when I'm in on create. So I want to remove references like that. It will, of course, still work if you leave them in there, but anybody who's running your application who opens logcat is going to be able to see all of your trace statements and your log calls. So we want to remove those. Now, another thing we want to do is to go into our manifest. If we have debuggable set to true, we want to set that to false. And what this is going to do is when we have debuggable set to true, Android includes some debugging information into your code. So we want to make sure we strip that out when it comes time to actually export our final application, because we want it to be as small and as lean as possible. Now, another thing, if we come back to the manifest tab, is the versioning scheme. Now, the version code is essentially an integer value that gets incremented for each new version of your application. So you need to think about versioning at the very beginning. So let's say this is a first update to this application. I would actually change the version name to maybe 1.1, and the version code would actually go up to 2. So again, this is an integer, not a float value. So for each new version of your application, this is going to be incremented. So just be aware of that. But for the first version, we're just going to say 1.0 here. Now let's just go to the source of our manifest file. Now here you can see this uses SDK, min SDK version. Now remember, in this course, we've been using the Gingerbread SDK. But in this case, I'm not using any Gingerbread specific code in my application. So I can lower that to say 7. And the version 7 is the Eclair SDK, which is 2.1. And essentially by putting min SDK version 7, that's going to make it that anybody with Android 2.1 or greater is going to be able to install this. So again, and this is something you're going to have to look at, and it depends on whether you're using those latest features that are in Gingerbread or in any SDK that you're actually using. So let's go ahead and run this, and I'll show you what this looks like on the emulator. So this is now compiling, and let's go over to the emulator and look at what this looks like. So again, this is the simplest possible application you can create. We have a nice photo there of B, and that's the entire application. So this is not going to sell a lot of applications, but we have our application, and I'll show you quickly the icon that I've created. Again, I've just based it off of that sample icon template that we used, and I've just changed it to a B, and there's my application icon. So those are the steps that you need to go through in order to make sure your application is prepared for its final export. Again, you want to turn off debugging, you want to remove log statements, check and make sure your versioning scheme is correct, set the correct minimum SDK version, and then most importantly, obviously, is to run the application and test it to make sure that it works exactly how you want it to.